Take your scriptures and turn to Genesis 6. Genesis chapter 6. We have been looking at some Old Testament stories to help us to recapture the language of sin. Now, I know I'm probably preaching to the choir mean anything to you? I mean, you all know what sin is, but our culture has lost its ability to really describe what's wrong with the world. They refuse to use words like sin. And so, just to remind us about that, I thought we would spend the weeks leading up to Easter to look at some texts that deal with the origin of the darkness in the world. Genesis 6. Let's begin with verse 5. The Lord saw that the wickedness of humankind was great in the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of their hearts was only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry that he had made humankind on the earth. And it grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out from the earth the human beings I have created. People together with animals and creeping things and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the sight of the Lord. These are the descendants of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God. And Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. And God saw that the earth was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted its way upon the earth. And God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. Now I'm going to destroy them along with the earth. Make yourself an ark of cypress wood. Make rooms in the ark and cover it inside and out with pitch. This is how you're to make it. The length of the ark, 300 cubits. Its width, 50 cubits. And its height, 30 cubits. Make a roof for the ark and finish it to a cubit above, and put the door of the ark in its side. Make it with lower, second, and third decks. For my part, I'm going to bring a flood of waters on the earth, to destroy from under heaven all flesh in which is the breath of life. Everything is on the earth shall die. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. And every living thing of all flesh you shall bring 2 of every kind into the ark, to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female. Of the birds according to their kinds, and of the animals according to their kinds, of every creeping thing of the ground according to its kind, 2 of every kind shall come into you, to keep them alive. Also take with you every kind of food that is eaten, and store it up, and it shall serve as food for you and for them. Noah did this. He did all that God commanded him. This is the Lord's word. Cormac McCarthy is one of my favorite authors, and he wrote a book that was released in 2005 called No Country for Old Men. The Coen brothers made a film out of it, won Best Picture in 2007. And it is a terrifying book. I'm not necessarily recommending you read it. I'm just telling you what I read so you know what kind of pastor you have. But it's a terrifying book. What happens is that Llewellyn discovers in a hunting expedition in the South Texas desert, he discovers a drug bust that had gone bad and found a bunch of money. and he takes the money, and a hitman named Anton Chigurh starts to chase him. And apparently there was this incredible shootout among the different cartels there in the desert. It doesn't end well for anybody. But Tommy Lee Jones plays the sheriff whose name is Ed Tom Bell. I love Texas names. Tommy Lee Jones plays Ed Tom Bell. And they come upon the scene where this carnage has happened, and there are bodies everywhere. There are dogs that have been killed. There are people that have been killed. And the deputy is riding his horse, and the sheriff is too, and they're looking around at all of this carnage. And the deputy says, "It's a mess, ain't it, Sheriff?" And Tommy Lee Jones says, "Well, if it ain't a mess, it'll do till one gets here." It's a mess. And when I look at this story that I just read to you a moment ago, and I look at the news, I have to say, I agree with Ed Tom Bell. If this isn't a mess, it'll do till one gets here. This story that we're going to look at this morning is filled with incredible sorrow. If you look at it, verse 5, the Lord saw that the wickedness of humankind was great in the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of their hearts was only evil. How long? Continually. Continually. I think this is perhaps the darkest story in all the Bible, and the Bible's got a lot of dark stories in it. But this is also a kind of window for us. I hope you can hear this morning, because as I look at what's coming to us in 2020, and I look at all that's already starting to fly, I see a storm. Now, I'm not an apocalyptic guy. I'm not saying the end of the world is here. I'm just saying that the airwaves are going to be filled with a whole lot of bad news. You know that. Why? This story helps us to understand why. So as we look at this old flannel graph story that you may have known in Sunday school as a simple, cute little story about building an ark and putting two of every kind in it, the reason the ark had to be built is so dark. But it's not all dark. So this morning I want to show you what I see as God's pain and then God's pleasure. The first part of this is very painful to get through. So let's look at it together. God's pain. We see it beginning in verse 11. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight. This is what God sees. God looks down on the earth, and it was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. Filled with violence. Verse 12. And God saw that the earth was corrupt, for all the flesh had corrupted its ways upon the earth. It was a cancer. It was a disease. It was an epidemic that just took over the entire world. And God sees all of this. The word corruption in Hebrew is a word that literally means something is spoiling or gone bad. It's like leaving some chicken to thaw on the counter of your kitchen for 2 days and forgetting that it's there for 2 days and then deciding you're going to make chicken noodle soup out of it. Something is going to go bad when that happens. That's the kind of imagery that God sees when He looks down on this earth. It is chicken that has been out on the counter too long. It is corrupt. It is ruined. It cannot be used. It cannot be safe. As Helen pointed out Wednesday night when we looked at this, that God is now looking at the creation in Genesis 6, and she compared that with what He said about it in Genesis 1. When He looked at the creation that He had spent 6 days with in Genesis 1, after all of that beautiful creative process, what did God say about His creation? It is good. And then in chapter 6, He looks at it and He says, I'm sorry I made it. It's not good anymore. It's ruined. It's rotten. In the first part of the Genesis, we see that God had this universe and He created the world, and you read it and it says that the waters covered the whole world, and He separated the waters, separated them from the sky, separated. Land appeared for humanity to have a place to thrive. Because the chaos of that primordial earth was not conducive for humanity to survive. So He created a place for man to live, the land. Man cannot thrive in chaos. God did not create man to thrive in chaos. By the time we get to these verses in Genesis 6, God sees that chaos and death are coming. Chaos and death are starting to reign. God left Adam in charge of tending to creation, and Adam failed. When I grew up in Westcliff, not too far from here, one year my dad built a house outside of town about 9 miles, and my mother wanted green grass, not mountain grass. She wanted Kentucky bluegrass, I think. She wanted something that you could mow and looked like a normal yard, not like my yard or your yard or some of your yards. And so my dad said, well, we need to bring some topsoil in. So he brought in 2 big old dump truck loads of topsoil for the front yard and the backyard. And he told my brother and I, your job this summer is to spread that dirt. And so they went to town to work. What do you think we did while they were in town at work, unsupervised? Well, we did not spread the dirt. And there was a song that was very popular by Paul McCartney, one of the Beatles at that time. And the name of the song was Uncle Albert. I don't know if you remember the lyrics of that song, but there's a line in there that says, we're so sorry, Uncle Albert. We haven't done a bloody thing all day. We're so sorry, Uncle Albert, but the kettle's on the boil, and we're so easily drawn away. Every time that song would come on, we'd go, oh, and we'd go out and push some more dirt around. Adam was in charge of taking care of the earth, but he and his sons didn't do a bloody thing to care for the earth. In fact, what they did is they brought more chaos and more corruption into the world by participating in evil. And by the time we get to this place in chapter 6, it is out of control, and even creation is coming apart and unraveling at the seams. And God says, I can't have this, because life without God is chaos. It's woven into the fabric of the universe that life without God will devolve into chaos. All you have to do is survey your own life and see that there are periods of time in your life when you walked away from God or did not walk with God, and your life is filled with chaos. You look at what happens in our country, and when this country walks without God, it's filled with chaos. When you look at Washington and you see that they're living every part of their life apart from God, it's nothing but chaos. In fact, it's an axiom of kingdom life that wherever you see chaos, you don't see God. If that's in the business world, in the church world, in the family world, in the marriage, in government, wherever there is chaos, God is absent. How do I know that to be true? Because Paul said it was true. Remember this scripture, 1 Corinthians 14? For God is not the author of confusion, chaos, but of what? You want to know where God's at? He's not where there's chaos. That is not God. It doesn't matter if it's in a church. It doesn't matter if there's Christian labels on it. If it's chaotic, if it's corrupt, if it's chaotic, God's not there. That's an axiom that we learn from this story. You'd have to quarantine yourself from all contact with the world to not notice that what this world right now needs more than anything else is a giant dose of humility, honesty, and hopefulness. Amen? Am I wrong about that? We need that. But unless we Christians become too smug, our faith teaches us that even when we are most sure that we are right about something, we are never free from mixed motives. Now, what I'm going to say in the next few minutes is going to irritate some of you, and I'm sorry about that. Not a lot sorry, but a little bit sorry. But our faith teaches us to be honest with ourselves, to take a hard look at our souls. And that's what I see in this story. God looked down on this earth and He saw that evil was invading every nook and cranny of the earth that He had created for us to thrive in. It was in everybody's souls down to their DNA. Our faith teaches us to assume that we are not always right and that others are not always wrong. The religious right and the religious left are absolutely convinced that they are 100% right about all issues. And when you're 100% convinced about anything, you know what happens? You stop listening. If I'm 100% right about something and you're trying to tell me something different, I've stopped listening to you. And the minute I stop listening to you, then I start to turn you into someone that disagrees with me. And when I turn you into something that disagrees with me, it's real easy for you then to become an enemy. And when you become an enemy, it's real easy for then me to resort to words of violence or acts of violence. That's what's spiraling out of control right here in Genesis 6. And that's uncreation. That's corruption. That's chaos. It's anti-God. I think all of us could use for a big dose of self-honesty, including your pastor. And self-honesty is catching yourself lying to yourself. Christians do it better than anybody. We need to catch ourselves lying to ourselves. Alexander Solzhenitsyn said it very beautifully that describes our heart. Look at what he says. If it were only so simple, if only there were evil people somewhere insidiously committing evil deeds and it were necessary only to separate them from the rest of us and destroy them. But the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being. And who's willing to destroy a piece of his own heart? What is he saying? He's saying that in my heart is evil, and in your heart is evil. And in my heart is good, and in your heart is good. Guess who that's also true of? Your worst enemy. In your worst enemy, there is good. In your worst enemy, there is bad. We are all in this same kind of predicament. We're just a mess. If it's not a mess, it'll do till one gets here. I'm not entirely right about anything, and I'm not entirely good. Other people, even when they're wrong, are not entirely bad and are not entirely wrong. The worst person I can think of is still an image bearer. Am I right about that? Who's the worst person? Don't name them and certainly don't point at them today, but who's the worst person you can imagine? They still bear the image of God in them, do they not? Isn't that what our faith teaches us? Here's the Christian truth about everyone that you've ever encountered. They bear the image of God no matter what you think of them. But what's happening in our culture and what's happening right now is that we are making them, whoever the them is for you, we're making them pure evil. Now, you wouldn't say that because we're in church, but in our thinking, and certainly as you listen to cable news, they are evil. And when they are pure evil and all of their motives are evil, then they cease being real. Here's what I'm trying to show you. I try to write a little bit, and one of the things I learned about writing, Daniel, maybe you'll back me up on this, a resident published author, is that when a villain, when an antagonist is 100% evil, 100% evil with no redeeming characteristics at all, they stop being real. They become cartoon characters. They become action figures. They become something that's not true. Because no one is 100% anything. And when your protagonist is 100% pure and never does anything wrong and always makes the right decision, an editor will tell you this isn't reality. So the literary world knows that no one is 100% evil and no one's 100% good. But in the current culture that we're in, that's exactly how we're set up. And that's dangerous because then you're not dealing with real people. It happens all the time. It shows up in literature, shows up in films. It happened in the Infinity Wars that none of you probably saw, but in that movie, Thanos is conflicted about destroying the universe. He doesn't feel good about it. Good for him. Even in Star Wars, and again, this is one of the things that probably you all watched, there's a villain named Kylo Ren, and he seems to be conflicted about killing his father, Han Solo. Now let me see if I can get one that you know. Christopher Marlowe. How many of you remember reading Christopher Marlowe? Anybody? Okay, so this is not working at all this morning, is it? Maybe this will help you. Have you ever heard the story of Dr. Faustus? Faust? Yes or no? If you haven't, I'll just skip it. Have you heard this story? So Dr. Faust, do you remember this? He's a scholar, he's brilliant. He sells his soul to Lucifer. Why? So he can get something he wants. He signs his name in blood, and the devil promises him he can have anything he wants. And at some point in his journey, he feels bad that he's forsaken Christianity and he's delved into the black magic. And because of that, he starts to debate whether or not he should continue. And he has a good angel and a bad angel. And the good angel says, you can repent. It's not too late. And the bad angel says, it's too late. You've gone too far. And so he caves in to the bad angel. But he's torn. He almost repents. And then the demons come and take his soul away to hell. Everybody knows that we're conflicted. Through our hearts is this evil, and through our hearts is this good. When I look at this story, as I wrestle with it this week, I see myself all over it. And honestly, I see several of you too. There's a darkness in my soul, and there's one in yours. Verse 5 says, the Lord saw that the wickedness of humankind was great in the earth. So what's God going to do about it? He looks at this spoil. He looks at this ruin. And it's gone so deep and so far down that he decides he's going to reset creation. Just reset. Anne Lamott said, almost everything works better if you just unplug it and plug it back in. Have you ever found yourself doing that? I do that with the computer all the time. I've even started to do it with lamps. It just works better if you unplug it and plug it back in. And God's just going to reset creation because it's not good. Judgment's coming. Judgment on this good earth that's 6 chapters old. God's going to judge it. Does that make anybody here uncomfortable? There ought to be somebody in here who says, I hate the idea that God would just judge everything. But you know who hates it worse? The one who created it. There's nothing wrong with your heart if it's filled with distress at the idea, because there's somebody else who experienced considerably more distress than you do at the thought of divine judgment. His name is God. One of the saddest lines in maybe all the Bible, I want you to see it. It's in verse 6. You got it? Got your eyes on it? And the Lord was sorry. Do you see it? And the Lord was sorry that he had made humankind on the earth. Now watch. And it, what? It grieved him to his heart. I'd like you to sit with that for a second. It grieved him to his heart. What in the world? The word grieved there is the same word that is used to describe the pain and the pangs that Eve would feel from bearing children from now on. God feeling that in his heart. It's the same word that is used to describe the discomfort and the trial that Adam would experience when he tilled the land and it would resist his touch. It's the same word. And God is saying, I am feeling that. That's what it says. I'm feeling that deep in my heart. See, God's not some distant hypothetical idea or some tyrant in the sky. God is a pained parent who experiences infinite sorrow over the life that we're trying to build when we exclude him. And so the action that God takes here is no cranky explosion of someone who's just pitching a fit. But God refuses to be indifferent about violence and darkness, and he gets involved. So he stops the corruption in its tracks. That's his plan. And tears trace down the cheeks of God as the storm clouds gather on the horizon of the world and the rain starts to come. This isn't an angry, this is someone whose heart's broken. This is God's pain. So God looks down at the world and he sees it corrupting, it's vile, it's filling his nostrils with the stench of rottenness. And he looks close and he looks close, and what does he see? He looks and he finds a man named Noah. And what does he see in Noah when he gets past all the externals of Noah and he looks down into Noah's heart? What does he see? You see it in verse 8. But Noah found what? Favor in the sight of the Lord. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God, apparently the only one. The words used to describe this man is amazing to me. The word righteous, Jerry asked about this on Wednesday, or just, relates to the proper behavior he had towards other people. In other words, how he interacted with the corrupt people in his world brought honor to God. It was righteous. He dealt with his fellow man in an honorable way. That's what the word righteous means. The word blameless does not mean sinless. It means that he was wholeheartedly devoted to God. And it says that there also, it says he walked with God. Now we know he wasn't sinless. Later on you'll read about it. He proves that he wasn't. But there was something about Noah that made God say, I can start again with him. I can start again. I can create a covenant with him. Adam and Eve blew it, but I can use Noah. And from Noah can come some hope. So Noah lives his life in a way that's congruent with God, and God rescues him. And God brings Noah through this watery grave and out the other side to freedom. He refuses, this is what I love about God, he refuses to abandon us, and he refuses to abandon creation. You see this even in this contractor's punch list on how to build the ark, if you looked at it closely. And how to fill it with animals. You can almost sense that God is redoing the creative process in the first two chapters of Genesis. It's like he's taken chapter 1 and chapter 2 and looking at it in chapter 6 and just kind of saying, let's do this again. There's not only darkness and judgment in this story, but there's also some light and grace. And I found this to be helpful when I turned to 1 Peter chapter 3. And you don't need to turn there. I think I have it. But Peter talks about this. He says, Christ also suffered for sins once for all, the righteous for the unrighteous, in order to bring you to God, who waited patiently in the days of Noah during the building of the ark, in which a few, that is, 8 persons, were saved through water. And baptism, which this prefigured, now saves you, not as a removal of dirt from the body, but as an appeal to God for a good conscience through the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Peter is saying that when you look at Jesus and what Jesus came to this earth to do, there is hope there. And what what the water was to the earth to bring destruction, Jesus coming to this earth and living a perfect life and dying the death that He died and then coming out of the grave on the third day was passing through that same kind of immersion into darkness so that you and I can live in newness of life. That's incredible to me. This is not without hope. I like the way Karl Barth said this. He says, Jesus was the judge that was judged in our place. And so Jesus climbs Mount Calvary to go to the cross. And the whole time He did that, He was stepping off the bench to receive the judgment for Himself. And just as Noah goes through the water, through death, and out the other side into a new life, Jesus goes down into death on behalf of you and me, and out the other side, and He brings us with Him. And so this is what I want you to hear before Easter this year. And that is this: the resurrection. This is a good time for you to hear what I have to say. The resurrection, when Jesus came out of the grave on the third day, do you remember that He had a body, right? Do you remember that? How do we know He had a body? Somebody answer for me. He ate. He did. And what else? What's some other proof that He had a body? They touched Him. In fact, He invited it. He said to Thomas, what? Come touch me. You don't believe? Come touch me. So there was something very material about Jesus. He came through death and out the other side on the third day, and He was eating, and He had body, He had wounds, He had all that. But there was something so spectacular, so phenomenal about this new body that people were amazed at seeing it. And He could just appear and He could disappear. There was something glorious about this body. Is everybody with me right here? So what I believe happened is that what Jesus experienced physically after the resurrection is what this earth will experience when the new heavens and the new earth come together. And that's what you and I are going to experience when we pass through the portals of death or Jesus comes back and takes us home. We're going to have that same kind of thing. The resurrection was a taste. A resurrection was a shadow of what we are going to experience. And the whole earth is groaning for that day. So we see the darkness all around us. I look on the news and it just triggers me. When I look in my own heart, it causes my heart to get so torn because of the darkness that's there. But then I also know that there's hope. Because the Christian story empowers me to deal with other people differently. I like the idea of judgment. Do you? Lynette says no. She says not want the idea of judgment. Let me tell you what. Liberals hate judgment. Now, I'm not saying she's a liberal because she's more conservative than I am. But if you talk about theological liberals and political liberals, when you think about them, they'll say, I don't want judgment. We do not judge. Enlightened people do not judge anybody. Am I right about that? That's kind of their mantra, right? Unless you're deplorable, and then they'll judge you. Right? Come on. And if you're a conservative, well, you like judgment. In fact, you want to help judge people who need judgment. You're going to show it. In fact, you'd like to carry the gavel. And we want to judge that group of people and those people and those people, all the while ignoring what's dark in our own heart. What I love about my faith is that I have to know this, that the worst person I've ever met is still an image bearer of God. And that the judgment of their soul is not mine to mete out. It's the one that hung on the cross. He's the judge, see. He's the judge that came down out of the bench to receive the judgment. So I don't need to judge those who are abortionists. I don't need to do that. You don't need to do that. I don't need to judge them. I don't need to judge the illegals that are coming over the border. We don't need to judge them because Jesus is the judge. I have to figure out another way to live. I have to figure out a way to live in a dark world. And the way I want to do that is I want to be an ambassador of peace and grace. There's going to be a payday. someday. But Jesus took all of our darkness so that we could be dispensers of grace. And I'm pretty sure I've already irritated you, but I'm pretty sure some of you are thinking, yeah, but we have to take a stand. Yeah, but we need to stand up for this. Yeah, but we need to do that. And here's what happens. When we do that and we do this and we do the finger thing like this, the people outside these walls start to think, you guys are just ticked off at everything, aren't you? You're mad. I have a friend named Andy. He put a post on Facebook that said, do you old people old Christians, I think that's what he said, you old Christians, you want to know why young Christians are walking away from the faith? It's because of old Christians. I sent him a private message and I said, how old do you have to be to qualify? Because that was a pretty harsh statement, and it wasn't true. But do you hear what he's saying? There's a sense in which all that the young folks, your grandkids, are hearing is how we are against so much stuff. I think it's time for them to hear what we're for. Are you for peace? Say yes, please. Because blessed are the... Thank you. So, are you for grace? For by grace you are saved through faith. Are you for love? For God is love. If you say you love your brother but do not do... There's time for us to share that and be ambassadors of that. Or our world is just going to continue to spiral down. The Genesis 6 story also invites us to enter the ark ourselves. I used to live in Washington State, and up there, there's a highway, kind of like our I-25, but it's called I-5, and you go north, and there's a little town called Burlington, Washington, and it's a sleepy little town, not much happening there. But they have a unique church building there, and the name of the church is His Place Church. It's hard to miss this church. They have built it with a unique design. I used to marvel at it. I've got a picture of it for you. This is the church. It's hard to miss that. I mean, if you're driving down the road and you see that, are you curious at least? Of course you are. This is not the only church that's built this way. Chris was telling me he heard of one down in South Carolina. I know there's one in downtown Helsinki, Finland. It's called Kapi Chapel of Silence, built in the same fashion like an ark. The church has been building churches in the shape of an ark for a long time. Do you know why? Because this is an ark. This is an ark. This is a place for people to come in out of the storm. This is a place for people to come in out of the darkness. This is a place for people to come in and find acceptance and hope right here. And it doesn't matter what color their skin is. It doesn't matter their political affiliation. It doesn't matter anything about their past or their future. All that matters is that when they come into this building with this group of people who focus on Jesus and Him crucified alone, and we give away grace when we come in here, then it doesn't even matter what sexual orientation they are. It doesn't matter which president candidate they voted for. It doesn't matter what they believe about a lot of things. If they come in here and they love Jesus, they are accepted here. And sometimes even if they don't love Jesus yet, they're accepted here, aren't they? This is a place of grace. I hope. I know. The church is like an ark. It's a place where there are dark hearts and dirty souls and filthy minds have gathered together, sometimes 2 by 2. You just look around, you can see some of it. You can just tell. There are some people here that need to be here. It's a place of grace. I want to invite you to come into the ark. And by the way, we need to bring as many people into the ark as we possibly can because it's a mess out there. It's also a mess in here sometimes. I went to a church growth conference 25 years ago, last one I ever went to. And the speaker said that we pastors, Karen will remember, I've already talked to her about this week, the pastors are never to let their worship leaders lead any song in a minor key. And when someone said, why? He said, because the last thing people need in living in a dark world is come to a house of worship and to hear sad music. Everything should be happy, 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 happy. Those were his exact words, 4 happies. There's a very descriptive Hebrew word for that kind of thinking. Would you like to know what it is? Hogwash. And the reason I say that is because life is not always happy. Happy, 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 Mr. Church Growth Guru dude. It's just not. Sometimes we live our lives in a minor key. I've enjoyed the song that Karen has been leading us to sing the last 2 Sundays in a minor key. I told her I want us to sing that on Easter. And the name of the song is Oh, the Deep, Deep Love of Jesus. It's an old hymn written in the first part of the last century. Because even though the reality is that you and I have darkness running through our own hearts, that's not all that's running through our heart. Instead of you and I going through the depth of God's judgment on sin because of Jesus, we can now know the deep, deep love of Jesus. And how deep is that love? This is how deep it is. Oh, the deep, deep love of Jesus. Vast, unmeasured, boundless, free, rolling as a mighty ocean in its fullness over me. Underneath me, all around me, is the current of thy love, leading onward, leading homeward to thy glorious rest above. That's the truth. So Mountain Heights Baptist Church, may you remember that no matter how big the mess you see on the news or in the mirror, the love of Jesus demonstrated on the cross is vast, unmeasured, and free. And maybe it's time for you to get in the ark, the ark of grace. Thank you for listening to a very weird and difficult sermon this morning. Let's pray together. Lord, we love you so much. Thank you for your love for us. Thank you that you provided the ark of the deep, deep love of Christ. May we, Lord, find our comfort there. I'm asking you, Lord, now, right now, that no matter where I go, no matter how dark that person seems, would you remind me that he or she bears your image? And for me to carry light to them, and love to them, and grace to them. I'm not very good at it, Lord. My heart is filled sometimes with hostility and violence, just like it was written here. I'm not good at this. I want to be better, though. I want to be better. So fill me, Lord, with your Spirit. So that I can be an ambassador of light.